What do you think, Monica? We're just waiting for Diane. I know they're waiting for me to pontificate, but it's not me, it's Janice today, so. No pressure, huh? Okay. 54, okay, great. Maybe I'll just go. I'll get started just because we want to give Janice time for her comment. So on behalf of the Department of Human Genetics and the U of M Genetic Counseling Program, we are excited to welcome you to the 12th annual Diane Baker Alumni Lecture. Today, as you can see from the sign up on the board, we'll be honoring Janice Berliner, a 1988 graduate of the University of Michigan Genetic Counseling Program. Janice joins a distinguished list of alumni who have inspired us over the past 11 years. And before I get to talking about Janice, I wanted to take a moment to recognize Diane Baker. However, first, I need to do a quick thank you to the selection committee that was responsible for helping us to identify Janice as the winner this year. You can see we have a number of our alumni, members of our faculty. In addition, I want to thank Monica Marvin for leading the efforts this year, and then Heather Dornoff for helping to organize this event overall. So talking a little bit about Diane Baker, I want to recognize that this award is meant to honor Diane's career at the University of Michigan, which spanned over a 25-year period. During this time, she founded our genetic counseling program, served as our first director, and in addition to her role as an educator, Diane provided genetic counseling in pediatric genetics, administered the state's newborn screening program, coordinated outreach clinics in northern Michigan, and provided local outreach to teachers and students in our area. Diane has also had impact far beyond the University of Michigan and the state of Michigan, and she served in a wide variety of leadership positions in all of the national genetic counseling societies, co-edited the first textbook in genetic counseling with our own Wendy Ullman and Jane Chouette, and was involved in the 2008 passage of GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. She's also contributed to many organizations over the years, including Friends of Patients at the NIH, the Genetic Alliance, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, PXE International, court-appointed special advocates for children, and most recently, the Children's Inn at the NIH. Everyone who has ever been lucky enough to interact with Diane is struck by her generosity, kindness, and genuine curiosity. So when we initiated this award 12 years ago, our goal was to identify members of the University of Michigan Genetic Counseling Program alumni community who embodied Diane's qualities in the creation of their own unique career. This year, we are thrilled to honor Janice Berliner as the 2021 awardee. Before ceding the stage to Janice, Before ceding the stage to Janice, I just want to say just a few words about her career and why she's the perfect person to receive this award. You can see from her brief bio in the program that there are numerous ways in which she has contributed to the advancement of the profession in her extremely productive career. In addition to her work as a clinical genetic counselor in the realms of prenatal and cancer genetics, she's held many leadership positions within the National Society of Genetic Counselors, serving as treasurer, a unique facet is she's been co-chair not once but twice of our annual education conference. She's served as the editor of Perspectives and served on the Journal of Genetic Counseling editorial board. She also served on the American Board of Genetic Counseling, where I was lucky enough to serve with Janice during that time. And then in the last year on the board was the chair of the Accreditation Council. Along the way, she's also distinguished herself as an author and published 2 books that bring to life stories about living with genetic diseases. Most recently in 2018, Janice assumed leadership of the Bay Path University Genetic Counseling Program. It was exciting for me to see her in this new role, as I had known this was a career goal of hers for many years. Shortly after I took over the leadership here at Michigan from Diane, she shared with me that she wanted to be a program director and that she was just waiting to find the right people to be part of her genetic counseling program. And so it's exciting to see that Bay Path was a home that was the right fit for her. Janice's determination, resilience, and the remarkable energy that she brings to everything she sets her sights on were noted by one of her nominators for this award. Using their words to close out my remarks, it was said, when I think of Janice and her decades-long dedication to our profession, I think this is what defines genetic counselors. So I'd like to call Janice to the stage and give her this small token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
So thanks. And so I just want to highlight as we get Janice set up that many of you know that Janice bleeds blue. She has no problem telling us this over and over, as you can see from these pictures. And she actually met her husband here at University of Michigan, and 2 of her 3 children also are going to be soon Michigan alums. So here today with her are both her husband, her sister, and her daughter, who's a current student at University of Michigan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Janice Berliner and let us share her remarks.
Thank you so much. It is so amazing to be here. Having been forced to stand up in front of the entire human genetics department to give 2 student seminars while I was a student here, as many of you have been, I never could have imagined doing this voluntarily. I don't know about any of you, but needing beta blockers practically to stand up in front of the Department of Human Genetics back then was a scary, scary time. Anyway, I'm very honored to be here today. I really appreciate Heather and Monica and Bev and Wendy and everybody for putting this together. I'm so happy to share my story with you. I know most of your guest lectures are probably on the topics of polygenic risk scores and homeobox genes and variant classification. And I don't have that specific kind of expertise to share with you. I don't have, one area of focus that I put into my career like that. So I thought it would be good to share my story of how I wound up back here after 33 years in this career that I think Bev exaggerates in how good it was, but I appreciate that. But before I do that, I have to tell you a funny story. So my second student seminar, which was in the fall of 1988, was on a paper. Let me see if I can, yes, was on a paper describing what was then the brand new technology of PCR. Everyone was in the room, as you know, all the students, the faculty in the department, including Diane's very famous husband now, the director of the NIH. I tell people that my claim to fame is that I taught Francis Collins how to do PCR. In the right circles, it's actually a very interesting story. People are impressed. It's quite shocking. Every year at the NSGC conference, the incoming president of the society gives an inaugural address. Those of you who've been genetic counselors for a long time might remember that the theme of Vivian Weinblatt's inaugural address in 2000 was to trust the process. Despite the fabulously crowd-rousing speech and my enormous respect for Vivian, I'll admit to you, I didn't really understand the phrase. But regardless of what she meant it to say, I'm thinking we can take it to mean that we should trust ourselves. Trust that we can figure out what we want and need in our lives and our careers, where our strengths lie, and who the people are who can help us achieve our goals and love and support us along the way. My professional path and my life path in many ways started in this department when, like many of you, all I wanted was to be a genetic counselor. I was right out of college and rather young and professionally inexperienced. I had done no shadowing or informational interviews with genetic counselors. And although I had done some peer counseling training, I will admit to you sheepishly, I didn't actually do any peer counseling because nobody called during the shifts that I had. I was always the one who everybody came to with their problems, but I was really just kind of flying by the seat of my pants in terms of telling them what they should do or what not to do. And I didn't have any real expertise to back me up. So when I was asked to do it in clinic, it was really intimidating. I loved the clinic, but I didn't always know what to do. We saw patients in the peds clinic at Mott Children's Hospital, like probably many of you do, every Friday, and we were asked to review our patients' charts and abstract all the relevant information to present it at a pre-clinic conference on Thursdays. I remember staring at 4-inch thick paper charts and having no idea what I was looking at. If they taught us how to do this, I missed it. The other problem, at least for me, was that there was one genetic counselor here in my first year, Diane. Where is Diane? There you are. Hi. Well, I figured if I'm talking about you and to you, I should know where to look. So that's always good. So as wonderful as Diane was, there was one of her and six of us, four first-year students, two second-year students, Wendy being one of them. So Diane couldn't supervise more than one of us at a time, so we were largely on our own in the clinic. Add to this that she was working in Lansing in the state newborn screening program, and by the way, was the president of NSGC at the time. So we didn't even have her every Friday. So all of the fabulousness that was Diane was not terribly often available to us individually. And in case you were wondering, nope, this is how Diane looked back then. The woman standing next to her was one of my classmates and a dear friend of mine and Diane's. Her name was Carol. May she rest in peace. Some of you may have heard of or even benefited from the Carol McTague Genetic Counseling Student Enrichment Fund. That's in her honor. Back then, there was no accreditation council for genetic counseling and no standards about supervision or the types or numbers of cases you should see as a student. There were also no rules about the courses we should take or any specific competencies we were expected to master. Because the program was reasonably new and very small relative to the human genetics master's and PhD programs, we didn't have courses designed for us. We were thrown into courses with the PhD students who understood the molecular genetics far better than we did. We were thrown, in essence, into the deep end of the pool and told to sink or swim without ever having had a swimming lesson. And this is true both in the clinic and in the classroom. In my second year, that changed a bit when Barb Biesecker came on board as the associate program director, and we had one psychosocial course. But of course, we were about to graduate because the program finished in December back then. So we didn't have all the fabulousness that was Barb until we were almost done with the program. So it wasn't an easy time, at least for me. It was a wonderful experience for me socially, as I loved my classmates and the other students in the department. And I met my husband while I was here, so there's that. I had a real friend group, perhaps for the first time in my life, but the program took a big toll on me emotionally. What I remember vividly that has stuck with me all this time and has helped me in working with students was something that Diane said to me. I don't know if you'll remember this, Diane, but it falls under the category of, never know how your words affect people, good or bad. Diane had called me into her office because I was struggling in clinic, and she wanted to tell me what wasn't going well, and I guess provide some pointers on how to fix it. That part of the conversation I don't remember, probably because I was devastated and embarrassed. But what helped a lot was when she said, and I'm quoting here, "We know you can do this. We wouldn't keep you in the program if we didn't." As upset as I was, that gave me encouragement and hope, which made all the difference. I've had a few students who've had some struggles, and I've used exactly those words to help encourage them and let them know that we have faith in them. Telling them about the struggles I had and how overwhelmed I felt, yet how I succeeded afterward, I think normalizes the experience for them, which is quite gratifying. Not necessarily what I went through back then, but I was glad if I could help. But what I didn't realize back then was what I learned here actually gave me some of the tools I needed to succeed later on. I learned strength. I learned to lean into what I didn't know so that I could open up to what I needed to know. I knew not to say, I don't know, when I didn't, instead of trying so hard to know the answer that I blurted out something wrong. It was a maturing process I really didn't know I needed. My first job after graduation was in a prenatal setting in a large academic medical center in New York City, Mount Sinai. There, I was able to branch out, see patients on my own, and start to build my confidence. One of the many very good things that came out of that job was one of the genetic counselors I worked with who one day asked me if I was a member of NSGC. I was new to the field and honestly hadn't even thought about it. She literally slid an application under my pen. Yes, the applications were in paper back then, and said, "Fill this out." So I did. And fairly soon after that, I started volunteering. I started small, but over the years, as Bev mentioned so kindly, did a lot of different things: public policy, professional issues, education, and every level of conference planning, culminating with co-chairing the whole conference one year. And as Bev mentioned, I was elected to be the treasurer of NSGC when I was 5 or 6 years into my career, which was a board position. I had never served on a board of directors. I had no idea what to expect. I learned leadership, strategic planning, delegation strategies, and a whole lot more. The fact that I could do that job and not balance our family checkbook was a source of endless humor to my CPA husband, but I digress. my favorite part of all the NSGC volunteerism was right after my treasurer position, when I was elected to be the editor in chief of Perspectives, the quarterly newsletter of NSGC. Hopefully some of you have seen it. Back then, it was an elected position that also came with a board appointment. I had actually been asked to become the chair of the finance committee, which most treasurers do. You know, they roll off of treasurer, roll onto the finance committee chair, but I politely declined. Given my aforementioned lack of aptitude for finance, I really didn't feel ready for it, and I was so much more excited to be part of Perspectives. For 5.5 years, I served in that position of editor and on the board of directors of NSGC, and I loved it. I really worked closely with the executive director of NSGC, which is really a one-woman operation at the time, and we were very proud of the product we churned out 4 times a year. I learned a tremendous amount from that position too, and all told, ended up being on the board for 7.5 consecutive years, which was actually the record at the time. Along the way, I was honored with the Region 2 Service Award, which meant the world to me then and now. After that, I was elected to the board of directors of the American Board of Genetic Counseling, or ABGC, which had been formed in 1993, which is a whole other very long story if anybody ever wants to hear that. At the time, ABGC was both the certification and accreditation body for our profession, which means this one board was responsible for accrediting the genetic counseling training programs and then certifying the genetic counselors thereafter. And of course, all of the administrative and best practice work that goes with all of those. Fun fact about my ABGC board tenure, which was 5 years, during that time, it was decided that we had become really a big enough organization that it was time to split into 2 boards, one for accreditation and one for certification, so as not ever to be accused as teaching to the test. That was a best practices thing, and we said, okay, now we're ready to do it. So this is when the ACGC was formed. And since I had been the chair of the accreditation committee, I ended up being the first past president of ACGC, never having served as the president. A little bit of trivia should you ever need it. In addition to all of that, I've been involved with writing NSGC practice guidelines, book chapters, journal articles, and 3 editions of a board review study guide that I created a while back, which I will get back to in a little bit. I gained so much insight through all of these things on leadership and group collaboration and how to crack a whip to be sure that committee members met their deadlines, which, believe me, is not an easy task. I feel like throughout my career, I've always been looking toward the next thing. It's not that I wasn't happy with what I was doing, but there were always new things that intrigued me. So for nearly 10 years, I did prenatal genetics and a little bit of pediatrics. And during that time, the field of cancer genetics was becoming more and more of a standard practice. I was talking to some of the students about that this morning. It was fascinating to me, though we had not covered cancer genetics in our training, because in the late 1980s, we knew there was something hereditary about cancers, but we had no molecular tools to do anything about it. But by the mid-1990s, when the BRCA genes had been discovered and genetic testing was being developed, more and more genetic counselors were hopping on the bandwagon, if you could call it that. Many of the people that I worked with knew that my interests were leaning that way. So when one of the nurses asked me if I had seen the job on the job board down the hall in the hospital, I jumped at it. I thought it was amusing. They thought they could find a genetic counselor by posting something on the wall in a hospital where there was only one genetic counselor, me. But anyway, that was a very exciting thing to discover. Unfortunately, as I mentioned to some students also, the job didn't work out all that well, given that I wasn't able to teach the old oncology dogs any new tricks. And they didn't understand how to utilize my skills despite many creative attempts to teach them. In fact, I remember the nurse manager telling me when she called me into her office to say they needed to reduce the number of hours that I worked because of the lack of patients. And again, I'm quoting here. She said, besides clubbing them over the head and dragging them in by their hair, I don't know how much more you could have done to increase the referrals in our cancer center. Alas, I didn't club them over the head and drag them in by their hair. So after 3 years, I moved on to a new cancer position. But the real shame of it was that I didn't really learn anything during that job because I had so few patients. But at that point, I was hired by a cancer center that made an arrangement with a local healthcare system to provide cancer genetic counseling services. And so I was hired to be their first outreach person, which was quite the learning curve, I will tell you. I set up the whole thing to mirror what they were whoops, I am one behind. I'm so sorry. There we go. Um, so what they were doing at the Cancer Institute of New Jersey was a great model for cancer genetics. And so they hired me to be their outreach person in what's called the Atlantic Health System, which is 3 local hospitals. Now I think it's more. And so my job was to go to each hospital 1 day a week and fighting for referrals, basically, which involved going to tumor board meetings, giving talks, and constantly trying to get the doctors and other healthcare professionals to understand what I did and how it would help their patients. It was a good job, and it was finally a chance to really learn about cancer genetics, though I didn't love going from one hospital to another to see patients 1 day a week in each of them. But what I didn't tell you is that that cancer center was affiliated with a major university in the state called the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, or UMDNJ, that later ended up merging with Rutgers, which is where I had gone to college. So I introduced myself at that point to the associate dean of the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences and suggested that we think about developing a genetic counseling training program. As Bev mentioned, it is something I've always wanted to do. So I was always looking for opportunities. I'm not even sure I could articulate why I always wanted to be a program director, but I vividly remember the day I resigned from my first job at Mount Sinai was the very day they announced they were starting a training program. And I went home and cried because had I known they were doing that, I would have figured out a way to stay. Not important other than that's how long I know I've been wanting to be a genetic counselor, program director, basically my entire career. So as I said, I approached the people at my current institution, which was the Cancer Institute of New Jersey, to start a program, which would really be restarting a program as Rutgers had one of the original genetic counseling training programs in the late 70s, early 80s, I think, that had closed fairly soon thereafter. We had many meetings. I had written a proposal. I built a curriculum. I built a budget. I had secured a medical director and even a faculty appointment for myself. But for some reason, the state of New Jersey didn't come along and drop a bag of money on my desk, to my ultimate disappointment. And just because it is a cute story, I will digress again and tell you that I was on the phone with my grandmother back then, and I said, "I don't think this is going to work out. I need a lot of funding." And she said, "Well, how much do you need?" I said, "I don't know, maybe $500,000." Beep, beep, beep. Oh. That was the last thing she ever said about it. I thought it was so funny. So anyway, this associate dean and I had been talking and planning for a few years on how to put this program together. And it wasn't working out, mostly because of funding. And an opportunity came along for me to work closer to my home in a cancer job that would not require me to travel from place to place and would allow me to build a department from the ground up. And I was really torn. You know, if I stayed, I might be able to realize my dream of becoming a program director, but it was looking less and less hopeful. So it might never happen. And then I might lose out on a good job opportunity in the meantime. So I had a heart to heart with this associate dean, and I told him how stuck I was, and he actually suggested that I take the job. He was really apologetic, but he said I would feel terrible if I convinced you to stay, and then we never got the program off the ground. He even suggested it might be better to recruit me from the outside, that might look better for the institution. So he said, take the job. And sadly, it never did come to pass, but it did give me the faith and confidence to start the new job without worrying about it. A number of years later, I got wind of the fact that Rutgers was actually starting a program independent of all the work that I had done. And it was being created by someone I knew, not professionally, but personally. So this is sort of a weird story, but this is a man who is a trained genetic counselor and a PhD geneticist. And his mother-in-law and my mother-in-law were roommates in college and have best friends ever since. So he kind of felt like family. His wife and my husband grew up as cousins. So I knew him from a couple of family functions, but I didn't know him well and I didn't really know him professionally. But I knew him just well enough to pick up the phone and say, I heard you're starting a program. I'd like to apply for the job as program director. Long story short, they narrowed it down to me and one other person, and they ended up hiring her because she had experience that I didn't. It was a frustrating cycle. I was telling some of the students this morning that they don't give you the job if you don't have the experience, but you can't gain the experience if you don't have the job. So it was a perfectly reasonable thing for them to hire her. And I soon met her at Human Genetics Association meetings of New Jersey. And I have to say, she's one of the loveliest people that I know. So I think it was a really smart move on their part to hire her, but I will admit it was still very disappointing as I somehow sort of felt like it had been my job to lose after all the time and energy I had put into it years before trying to develop it. But going back to the new cancer job closer to home and all in one office, moving to this opportunity was exhilarating, yet nerve wracking. They had had a genetic counselor in their cancer center in the past, but not in a while. And I don't know the details, but apparently it hadn't gone all that well. And so I think there was some wariness amongst the people in the cancer center of having another genetic counselor. It was my job to develop the referral strategies, intakes, consent forms, and every other form, and start networking with the doctors, the nurses, the social workers, the art therapists, et cetera. I went to tumor board meetings and case conferences and worked with the legal department. And did you know that most institutions have a forms committee? I didn't either, but I needed to go there too and had all of my new forms approved. Before long, I actually had a pretty thriving practice, basically by myself, and started supervising students from the Sarah Lawrence program, which I had done throughout my career and all my different jobs. And it turned out to be a really good move. You know, I loved the people I work with. I learned so much about administration. I had a lot of independence there, although the medical oncologist who was my boss would bump into me in the hallways every 6 months or so and say, we should really meet so we can go over what you're doing. I'd like to know how you're doing. And then he was too busy and it never happened. I think, if you know you're doing okay when your boss leaves you alone for literally years at a time, doesn't know what you're doing. Um, but one of the people that I met in the job was an oncology social worker named Jill. She became a very close friend, and after a few years, she decided to go back to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center where she had worked previously. And although the mothership of Sloan Kettering is in New York City, they had recently built a regional facility near my house and Jill's house in New Jersey. We had kept in close touch, and one day it occurred to me I might be able to take what I was doing at the hospital where I was and build a program like that at Sloan Kettering near my home. I really liked the hospital where I was and the people that I worked with, but I really wanted to get more involved in research. And there was something about the idea of Sloan Kettering that really appealed to me. So even though the community hospital where I was fairly large and very well respected in the area, it certainly wasn't the large academic medical center that Sloan Kettering was. So while I was on the phone with Jill one day, I said, do you have a genetic counselor where you are at Sloan in New Jersey? She said, no. I said, don't you think you should? She said, yeah. So I said, well, okay, so who do I talk to? So she gave me a name and I reached out to this man who was the director of medical oncology for all of the Sloan Kettering system, and met with him and the director of all of surgical oncology for the system, who he just sort of brought along. And I explained to them what I had done at my current job and how I could do the same for them in their regional site, New Jersey. Of course, they had a very sophisticated setup for cancer genetics in the city, but they didn't have anything in New Jersey. So they loved the idea and they started the ball rolling, but he told me at the time this place works glacially slowly, and he wasn't kidding. 2 full years it took to get that job off the ground. Lucky for me, I had a job I liked in the meantime. but we worked together and we got it done. And so then, you know, there I was at Sloan Kettering. And one of the jobs I was hired to do at Sloan Kettering, in addition to, of course, starting up the program in New Jersey, was to see patients at a site that they had in Westchester County, New York. For those of you not familiar with New York metropolitan geography, that is a hike from my house. One Monday a month, which turned into 2 Mondays a month, I would get up early and haul myself up the Garden State Parkway and over the Tappan Zee Bridge to see a full day of patients and face the traffic going home. It was not ideal, and I pushed and pushed for us to hire a genetic counselor strictly for the Westchester site. There was no shortage of patients who were kind of getting annoyed that I could only see them on Mondays and not even every Monday. So the wait was long because, you know, it was only twice a month. So again, it took a while, but we did hire someone for that site to do what I was doing in New Jersey. And then another site opened up in New Jersey, and then another. So what I had started at my site was now being replicated all over the place, which was quite exciting to see. I think when I started at Sloan Kettering, there were 9 genetic counselors, and now there's at least 20. So it's really built up. It was a wonderful job. I really enjoyed people I adored. It was busy beyond belief. And I never really did have time to do any of that research because I had such a busy big clinical practice. But the medical oncologists I worked with there taught me more than I had ever learned before. They are legendary in the field. I remember when I interviewed with them, I felt like I'd had an audience with God, or rather 3 oncology genetics gods. If you know any of them, you know that they can be interesting people to work with, but they're amazing in everything they do. But the whole time, I still nurtured my dream of being a program director. And I remember sitting at my desk at Sloan Kettering one day and seeing a posting on the NSGC listserv for the associate director job at the Brandeis program, which I immediately forwarded to my husband with subject line, "Want to move to Boston?" His response was quick and direct. Do you remember this? "I hate the Red Sox and I can never root for the Patriots." Right? Thank you. Thank you. I guess he thought I was joking. I wasn't joking. Every time there was a job like that open, I salivated over it. But David's job wasn't allowing him to just pick up and move, and our kids were entrenched in school and their sports, and I couldn't just move them. Our friends, our parents, our siblings were nearby, and we just didn't feel comfortable moving away anyway. So I continued seeing cancer patients, giving talks, attending case conferences, and trying to get involved in research, though again, there was rarely time for it was such a busy clinical practice. Sorry, excuse me. And I continued volunteering for NSGC and other organizations, writing practice guidelines, overseeing a column in Perspectives, volunteering with my local Relay for Life chapter, and other things. But I knew someday I would be a program director. One day, I got a phone call out of the blue from a genetic counselor I knew who'd been the program director at the University of Cincinnati for many years. Diane, this is what I said I was going to talk about later. She had retired from the University of Cincinnati, but was working as a consultant to other schools as they created genetic counseling training programs. She told me she knew I had always wanted to be in program leadership. As Bev mentioned, everybody who knew me professionally knew that. And she said she was working with a school in Western Massachusetts called Bay Path University. And to quote my son, "What is a Bay Path?" But they were looking to start a program. She was developing the curriculum for them and thought it'd be perfect for the job as their first program director. I was really touched that she thought of me, and it seemed so impractical to go up there. I remember saying, "Nancy, I love you for thinking of me. Thank you, but no thank you. I'm not moving to Western Massachusetts." Maybe a year later, still working at Memorial Sloan Kettering, I literally bumped into Nancy in the ladies' room at an NSGC conference. She was carrying a stack of glossy color photos of Bay Path and the program. She handed me one saying, "I still think you'd be perfect for this job." And again, I said, "Nancy, I love you for thinking of me. Thank you, but no thank you. I'm not moving to Western Massachusetts." But I was ruminating and thinking about it. And maybe another year after that, I don't know, I saw a job ad on the NSGC listserv for the program director position at Bay Path. And I thought, well, what have they been doing up until now? Who was their director? Had they started taking students? I really didn't know anything about it. I had never even heard of Bay Path. So I looked it up, of course, and I found that the interim director was Caroline Lieber, who had been the program director of Sarah Lawrence for 15 years, and I knew pretty well. So that was a bit of a surprise. By this point, my last child was finishing her senior year in high school, and the program was described as hybrid, part online and part in person. And I thought, if ever I was going to think about moving, now might be the time I could at least start to think about it. Or maybe I wouldn't have to since it was part remote. I wasn't really sure how this would go. This was a Tuesday. I remember this. By 11 o'clock that night, I had applied for the job. I figured, what do I have to lose? Wednesday morning, I was sitting at my desk at work and my phone rang, or maybe it was an email, I don't remember, from someone at ACGC. Dear Janice, you are a trained site visitor. We're looking for site visitors to do a site visit at Bay Path because they're on probation. Uh-oh, I said. That changed everything. You know, would I consider being the program director of a program that was on probation? It seemed like a great idea. So I emailed her back saying I'd be more than happy to do the site visit, but full disclosure, I just applied for that job and it seemed like a conflict of interest. But since I was now thinking never mind about the job, I thought it was possible that it would be kosher. She assured me it would decidedly not be kosher for me to do the site visit, and so that was the end of that. That evening, my cell phone rang. I don't know about you, but I never pick up the cell phone if I don't know who it is. And it was a 914 area code, which is Westchester County I was telling you about before. Who do I know in a 914 area code? So normally I wouldn't have answered it, but for some reason I did. I don't know why to this day I picked up the phone. Janice, it's Caroline Lieber. Let me tell you why this would be the perfect job for you. So she explained to me why the program was on probation, said she thought I would be perfect to do this. And so within about 20 hours, I had gone from tentatively excited about this job to disappointed that this wasn't going to be the place either to maybe back to excited again about it. And Caroline did a very good job explaining to me why it was really okay. And I have to tell you, I have never in my life had a red carpet laid out for me like that before. They were so warm and inviting. They were so welcoming, and they made it pretty clear that what I knew about accreditation made up for what I didn't necessarily know about higher education. So it was going to be really hard for me to say no. But in the meantime, the program at Mass General had just gotten off the ground and they were looking for an associate program director. By now, the Rutgers program had been growing and they were looking for an associate program director. All of a sudden, I had options. So I interviewed all around, but before I even had a chance to hear from Mass General or Rutgers, I got the call from Bay Path, we'd like to offer you the job. And at the time, right at that time, I went to a Human Genetics Association of New Jersey meeting, and I bumped into Jessica Joines, who's the director of the Rutgers program, and we had a heart-to-heart. And I admitted to her, I've applied to these other jobs. I was offered a job at Bay Path, but I'd really like to work with you at Rutgers. What do I do? And she just looked at me incredulous, and she said, "Why would you be an associate program director when you can be the director? Take the job, and you can work from home." So she had a point. I figured I could do that. And I have to say, I love the idea of working mostly from home. Um, so, off to Bay Path I went. Working remotely is a really cool thing if you can do it. If you're disciplined enough to do the work, I remember my son saying to me at the time, "So your commute's going to be either 3 hours or down the stairs." And most of the time, it's down the stairs, which is pretty nice. To an office that had been our living room until my daughter pointed out, remember this? Nobody uses the living room. What do we need that room for? Turn it into an office. So I did, which has really been fun. And I couldn't be happier. I work hard there. I managed not to be too distracted by the laundry, the dishes, or a million other things. But I also have the flexibility for doctor's appointments and plumbers and walking the dog at noon. And meanwhile, I have the nicest office I've ever had at Bay Path, and I'm never there. But my favorite part is this. I don't know if this laser pointer works. Nope, the sign on the door. Dream finally realized. Took a lot of starts and stops and a lot of years, but I'm there. Teaching remotely is a really interesting thing. People think that online education is about correspondence courses or that we put everything up on our website and say, see you in December for the final. It is not like that. All of our courses are online, but they are carefully planned so that each week is made up of a lecture, some readings or videos, and an assignment. And the students are accountable on a weekly basis. So this is a little bit of what it looks like. They have access to things ahead of time. If they want to skip ahead a little bit, they can, but it's not a self-paced course in that sense. And we hold fairly frequent synchronous evening meetings for guest lecturers, for group projects, role plays, debates, journal clubs, and lots of other things. So the students are actually more cohesive as a cohort than you might think. We make a very strong effort to create opportunities for them to work collaboratively and be together. And they have their own efforts independent of program leadership, movie nights and game nights, and not really even sure what they do. One example is our annual Carpe Diem Dash, which is a fundraiser for the university, which last year and this year has been virtual given the pandemic, which was great for us because our students are all over the country and weren't going to be able to do it together anyway. And then twice a year, we have our students come to campus for a weekend during which we do all sorts of experiential learning. We take them to local laboratories to tour. We have guest speakers. We have group activities. We do book clubs, all sorts of things. A social time, we have all our meals together. It's really very nice. And many of them have expressed to me that they feel a lot closer with their classmates than they ever thought they would. So that's pretty gratifying. The other really nice thing about having an online program is that when a pandemic happens, you're already ready. Changing around our clinical rotations was, of course, not easy, but at least we didn't have to move our whole curriculum as well. So we're kind of hoping that this is going to develop into more of a model for other programs going forward. As a last topic, some of you may know that I have, over the past few years, written a couple of novels that Bev mentioned before that have genetics themes to them, which I'm going to tell you about shortly. But this was a little bit of an evolution too. It feels like a really exciting chapter of my life, if you'll pardon the terrible pun. People always ask how I became an author and whether I had always wanted to be a writer. And the truth is that I had never thought about it at all. I loved editing and I was a decent writer, but I had never written fiction. The only dalliance I had had in writing at all was really editing. Going back a little bit, somewhere around 2012, I had gotten a call out of the blue from the editor of Oxford University Press. He said he had recently taken his wares to a genetics conference and all sorts of genetic counselors were coming up to him saying, we were looking for genetic counseling books or books that were at least relevant to them. And he said to me, genetic counselors are huge readers, but they have nothing to read. Would you consider maybe writing something? And I was confused at first how he found my name or why me, but it turned out that he was actually looking for somebody to write a study guide for our boards. And since I had been on the ABGC board, I guess he figured I would have some inkling about certification and, maybe I'd be interested in doing it. I thought it was pretty funny that he asked me, of all board members, considering I had had this history of writing study guides in the past. But back then, the exam was only given once every 3 years. And so when I was studying for my boards, I was furiously taking quadrillions of notes, as I'm sure you can all relate to. And I remember my father saying to me one day, why would you go through all of that effort and be the only one to benefit from it? I think you should turn this into a study guide and sell it. Okay, seemed like an odd thing to do, but I actually did it. And 3 years later, did an updated version, and 3 years after that, did another one. So that is how the study guide was born. And you can see the silly karyotype knot thing on the left. That was my idea of figuring out what genes were where, very rudimentary at the time. But because of all of that, I felt like I had some credibility to write a study guide for Oxford University Press. But I also felt like it was going to be a huge conflict of interest since I was still on the ABGC board at the time. So I said, would you consider some other topic? And he liked the idea and said, bring back what you got. So for ideas, I went back to Vivian Weinblatt, the genetic counselor I mentioned at the beginning, the one who had told us to trust the process. Hers was an opinion I really respected, and I asked her what topics she thought our colleagues would want to read about. So she suggested ethics. And while she told me she had about 5 minutes to talk, we probably talked for 10. And in those 10 minutes, came up with all the different chapters we wanted to see in this book and who of our colleagues we thought would be good to write them. So, probably the most productive 10 minutes of my entire career. And what came out of it was this. I am proud to say it is used as a textbook in my program, and I know some others. I don't know about this one. Um, as for the fiction writing, for a good number of years now, my two favorite authors have been Jodi Picoult and Lisa Genova. Jodi writes books about all sorts of subjects, but has several on topics that really resonate with me. One of them, most of you have probably read, called My Sister's Keeper, which has many, many medical ethics issues in it that I find endlessly fascinating, and I actually teach it in my ethics class. Another is called Handled with Care, which is about a little girl with osteogenesis imperfecta. Some of the stories and certainly the endings can be far-fetched, but I really like that she's writing about these topics. Lisa Genova is the author of Still Alice and Inside the O'Briens and several others. I was talking to some of the students about this morning. She has a PhD in neuroscience from Harvard, but she writes fiction. The idea is to make neurologic disorders more accessible to the general public. And if you haven't read her books, do yourself a favor, please do. They're really terrific. I'm hoping that maybe they can use it as an assignment or something. Psst. Inside the O'Briens, one of my favorite books of all time. It has to do with a family with Huntington's disease, but it is a novel. It's a story about a family. So you learn all sorts of things about Huntington's without even knowing you're doing it. So one day, while on vacation with my husband in Cancun and reading a Jodi Picoult book on the beach, like you do, I thought, I could probably do this. I could probably write a book like this. So when we got up from our chairs to take a walk on the beach, I said, I think I want to write a book. I didn't think about it first. I just blurted it out. And I was positive that I would hear in response, oh, sure, in all your spare time, write a book. But what I heard instead was, so write a book. And in the next hour, we were walking on the beach. We pounded out a skeleton of what this book could look like. Maybe he knew something that I didn't about the fact that I could do this. So what came out of that about 2.5 years later is this, which, as I mentioned to some of the students, is about a baby girl with a metabolic disorder. And when she's diagnosed, the family does some digging into how did this happen to our family? And they come to learn all sorts of secrets that threaten to tear their whole family apart. So it's a genetic story, but a whole lot more. And once I realized that I could do this and I truly enjoyed the process, I started a second one. So In Good Conscience is a story of an actor in his early 40s who is suddenly terribly sick. One of the nurses in the cancer center where he's being treated looks in his chart because he's a celebrity and she's intrigued by him. When she's suspicious that his family history may represent a hereditary cancer syndrome, she goes to talk to him about her concerns. And what unfolds is this whole ethical confidentiality versus duty to warn story. If you'd like to know anything more about any of these, let me know, please, now or in the future. And I have bookmarks for each of you if you are interested. All of these experiences, culminating with being an author, have given me a depth of understanding of my profession and my career that have gone a long way toward giving me the confidence to say, stand up here for 45 minutes and tell you about my life. Granted, it's a topic I know well, but still, figuring out what I was able to do and what I could make happen for myself throughout my adult life has been both a challenge and a gift. So we trust the process. I'm here to tell you, if you have a dream, don't give up on it. You can do it the way I did. I have made all my professional dreams come true, the personal ones too. Always look for mentors along the way and be one when you're ready. So many people have looked out for me, and in turn, I have done it for others. I've heard a lot of people say that our profession can be a little sorority-like, and there's some territoriality and some infighting. You know, it might be true now and again with any organization, but I don't see it. I see our profession as an opportunity for networking, for support, for affiliations, and a lot of fun along the way. Your classmates may be some of your best friends throughout your life, and that's a really good thing. This is me with mine in 1988. Not the best picture in the world, but it means a lot to me. I said at the beginning that we should recognize the people who can love and support us on our journeys. I would just like to quickly recognize three of the amazing people who supported me on mine and are here today. My dear husband, David, who I met on this campus 34 years ago. My amazing sister, Donna, president of my fan club and #1 cheerleader, who would never let an occasion like this go by without being here to celebrate it. And my truly incredible daughter, Stacy. I'm going to cry. The youngest of my 3 children and the second who has been a student at this university. She's graduating from the School of Education in a few months. We are Wolverines through and through in our house. And it means the world to me that the 3 of you are here. And to Diane, thank you for teaching me and pushing me to be who you knew I could be. It may not have been easy, but it has been an incredible ride that I wouldn't trade for anything. Being honored with this award today is humbling and feels like the culmination of all of it. As the wonderful Rascal Flatts song goes, and I am paraphrasing here, God bless the broken road that led me back to the Department of Human Genetics at the University of Michigan. It's been a true pleasure to speak with you all today, and I welcome your questions and comments. Thank you so much. You notice I'm leaving it on this slide.
So I think we can open it for questions. Monica can monitor the chat and see if there's anything there. So I have a question, Janice. So thank you for a really wonderful talk and a look at a career that we don't often get to see from the outside. Where do you see the next iteration of genetic counseling going? What do you see as the next frontier for us?
Yeah, gosh, so many things have happened already. I was just talking to some of the students and telling them that when I saw patients, a lot of times I would explain to them how genetics kind of felt like everything we were learning was the tip of the iceberg, and if you're standing on the very top of the iceberg and you look down and you see it goes down a little bit further, and there's a little bit more under the water, but you don't really know how much. And then the water recedes a little because you're learning more and you go, oh, it goes down a little bit further than that. And then you step a little further down and oh boy, it keeps going, right? And so that's how I feel about our field in general, is that, when I was in school, when you were, we were like more or less at the tip of the iceberg, and now we're like down here and we have no idea where it's going to go because there's still new things to be done and seen. And, Diane was telling me last night some of the research interests that Dr. Collins, it's hard to call him that Francis has, and into multifactorial diseases that we don't know that much about yet, and we will, right? And then there's all these people going into industry and DTC testing. There's so many things that we could do. This sky is the limit for you. If you can conceive it, you can do it. Don't let anybody tell you you can't. So if you want to be a clinical genetic counselor your whole life, great. But if that's not enough for you, or if that was great for a while, but now you're thinking you want to work for industry, public policy, public health, there's 8 billion things you can do. Do it. If you go into it and you then hate it, you'll go back. But don't be afraid to follow your dreams. I don't know that really answered your question, but I think it's really important. See what I did there? I dodged it all. Yeah. Yeah.
The workforce and student bodies. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you look at an online program like BayCat and the role that it can play.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Great question. So for anybody who didn't hear it, Monica said, we're always looking for ways to diversify our profession. And do I see virtual training as one of the ways to do that? And the short answer is yes, absolutely. The longer answer is, I've had a number of students who have said to me, I never could have been a genetic counselor if it weren't for your program. Because there are a lot of people who are really kind of locked into their geography, whether it's a partner in a job who can't move, or even the person, him or herself, who's in a job and still needs to keep that job, or you have children in the school system, or you have elderly parents who need caring, or whatever it is. So if the only programs are those that are on ground, if you don't live within an hour or two of those programs, you're out of luck. Well, with our program, you are not out of luck. It's not just me. There are other programs starting to develop that are online. And so our applicants tend to be a little bit older and have a little bit more experience. I'm not going to say we have nobody right out of school. We do, but we have people who've been social workers for 10 years, who've been in marketing, who've worked in labs, who've done all sorts of different things. Some of them have other graduate degrees. I can't tell you how many students we have who already have PhDs. It's pretty astounding. And so there's almost no choice but to diversify the class that way, which then diversifies the profession. And we are extremely proud of that. I have so many applicants who say, I'm really not a traditional applicant. Around here you are. That's our average student, is somebody who's been out in the field for a while, and not maybe our field, but out in some field. Some of them are genetic counseling assistants, most are not. But they bring a wealth of diversity to the program that we probably wouldn't have had otherwise. Really fun.
Okay, I'm going to ask another question. This one's from the chat. How are you able to help other genetic counseling programs adapt during the pandemic / lockdown?
Good question. Yes. So I'm trying to think. There are 4 or 5 programs now that have some element of online learning. So, our program is all online, not the clinical rotations, but all of our didactic coursework is online. And the Boise State program is like that. The Indiana State program is, the first year is on ground and the second year is online. And then I forget, the Nebraska program, I think, has some element. Anyway, those of us who are the leadership of those programs got together to do a workshop at the program directors retreat about a year and a half ago to talk about exactly that. We didn't do it in a panic reactively to a pandemic. We did it with intentionality, designed to be that way. So what is different about that? And it was really a cool thing. There are a lot of skeptics. I will tell you, there are still a lot of people who are like, this can't be done, but it can, and it is. And we're very pleased with it.
Okay, I'm going to go with another one. This is also from the chat. What is the next big project you would like to undertake as program director of BayPath? No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah, we are starting to think about certificate programs, maybe possibly dual degree programs. I don't know. It's sort of in its infancy, but working with the people in healthcare management or the Doctorate of Health Sciences program to try to make, let's say, a genetic counseling track within the Doctorate of Health Sciences. So no, you're not, if you do that program, you're not going to be a genetic counselor, but you will have a lot more education on what do genetic counselors do? How can I, at least in a rudimentary way, talk to my patients about what genetics is and what genetic testing is? And oh, by the way, go see a genetic counselor. So we might do it that way, or we might do a dual degree. I don't know, but there's a lot of different things that we could do. And I think the way the field has grown, going back to Bev's question before about what do we see as the next iteration of our profession, there's so many things we could do. So for example, one of my genetic counselor friends started a company called Watershed DNA, where she meets with people, families, couples, support groups, having to do with what do you do when you find genetic testing results through 23andMe or any of these other companies that are not what you were expecting. From a health perspective, an ancestry perspective, parentage perspective, it happens so much more commonly than you might think, and a whole lot more commonly than people think when they're signing that little consent form and checking the little box that says, yes, I saw that this could reveal some information about my family, yada, yada, yada. But it does, and it has torn families apart. So she's the one to help people kind of figure out how to cope with this information, put them in touch with other people who are a little further down in the process. It's a great support organization. She created that out of nothing because she felt there was a need. That's pretty cool. So if you see a need in anything, talk to your colleagues, talk to trusted people, and figure out how to do it. If it doesn't work, you're no worse off, but don't ever stop trying. Yeah.
So Janice, you present your story. Thank you for presenting it in a way that makes it such a story. Oh, I bumped into someone in the bathroom. Oh, the mother-in-law is apologetic. You, yeah, those are not easy conversations to start, and especially. Oh, okay, thanks. How's that? And I think especially under COVID, when so many of us are not interacting with others, we're interacting with a screen. I think that there's I'm going to use the word mystery behind how someone like you makes all those steps and connections.
Mhm.
And a lot of us sitting in this room, like, what's the magic? How do you do that? How do you make that work? That has been successful for you, that moment when you reach out to a stranger.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
Well, the first thing to have is a big mouth. I have been blessed with such. So if you're willing to reach out to people that you don't know and put yourself out there, because really, what do you have to lose? I saw you give a talk on XYZ at NSGC. I was really fascinated by that. Could you tell me more? Who's not going to want to talk about her research or her new clinic practice or whatever? Or you say, I've been thinking about doing X. I've been thinking about starting a program. You're at Rutgers, I'm at Rutgers. How do we make that happen? What's the worst the person could say? No. So I just always looked at it as a risk benefit thing. I have so much more to gain from this than I have a risk of putting myself out there. You know, if you have an idea, call me, I'll tell you how to do it. I don't have a better answer than that, Dan. I appreciate the question, really. I never looked at it as any kind of skill. It was just maybe a little bit of chutzpah. Yeah.
I'm curious if your students take non-traditional paths after getting their degrees, or if they're continuing on with traditional genetic counseling career
That's a
trajectories.
great question. We've only graduated 3 cohorts of students so far. So my N is fairly small. But as far as I can tell, the vast majority of them have gone into clinical genetic counseling careers, or maybe lab careers, but they're genetic counselors. One of them didn't. He had a job at, I think it was Myriad at the time. I don't think he's there anymore, but he was doing something other than genetic counseling and stuck with it. Never even took the boards. So I don't know what we did to turn him off, but stayed away. And a couple of others already had jobs sort of in the realm. You know, one of them was already working for, not Invitae, one of the labs, I forget. And she just stayed and kind of scoogied into a different role. A few of them have done that, I think. I can't think of any others who didn't become clinical counselors at this point. Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to first of all, again, congratulate Janice on this.
Thank you.
Award, and thank her for giving us an outstanding talk and insights into her career. And I know that she's available for questions
Yes.
afterwards if you feel like you're doing this.
Yeah.
So,
And if anybody would like a bookmark, I have tons of them. Help me use them. Oh, would you? Thank you. Yes. Okay. My sister, this is Donna. She's going to walk around with it. If you're interested, don't feel obligated.
all right, so let's once again thank
Thank you.
that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you enjoy it? No, this is
Oh, yes.
Let's just end it.
Oh, you're so nice. We had a great morning.
Thank you. Let's just here. Oh, here.